All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm just going to give it a second as our attendees begin to populate in our webinar this morning. It is so great to see everybody popping up in that little attendees section of my screen today. So again, thank you all for joining us. My name is Lindsay Bicknell, and I'm with Utah Business. I'm pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar hosted by our dear friends at Holland Hart. Today, we will be talking about forward-looking policies and programs that organizations of all sizes can implement to improve the workplace and opportunities for working parents and women, especially as they rebuild their careers post-pandemic. Joining us from Holland Hart today is our moderator, Emily. Before I turn it over to her, I do just want to let you all know that we will be having a Q&A session towards the end of today's webinar. So if you have any questions, please let us know by typing it into that little chat box on your screen, and we will circle back and make sure we answer our questions today. We will also have a video of today's webinar available on our website, utahbusiness.com, after we've finished. So keep an eye out for that. You should also receive an email post-webinar today with that video link. So Emily, I will turn it over to you. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much. My name is Emily Tabak. I'm an environmental compliance attorney at Holland Hart. And I'm also a board member of Women Lawyers of Utah. And like many of you, I am very personally invested in this particular topic. I came back from maternity leave about a month into the pandemic and was immediately put into a situation where I was balancing my workload responsibilities along with my husband's full-time job, along with my preschooler and my infant at home temporarily. And so I am very interested, as I'm sure all of you are, in what the future of workplaces in Utah looks like. And so we have a really fantastic group of panelists today to address that, and I'll tell you a little bit about them shortly. But I did want to also mention that I've been really privileged as an employee of Holland Hart to have incredibly supportive partners that I work with, to have had workplace policies that I've been able to take advantage of, including my maternity leave, as I mentioned, and the availability of flex time policies that the firm has had in place for a number of years. And so I think this is a really important and timely topic. So our conversation today is going to explore, first from a more general research-based perspective, what effects has COVID had on women and working parents in the workplace? So an understanding of where we are, and then also what types of policies different businesses can put into place, and what types of policies have been successful. From there, we'll plan to talk to individual businesses and business leaders about the ways that they have had to implement these policies during this really challenging time, and what types of policies they think they're going to be using going forward. And what are the best tools that we have for success and rebuilding careers? And can we look at COVID as an opportunity? So I'd like to introduce our esteemed panel. We have Dr. Susan Madsen with us. She's the inaugural Karen Haight Huntsman Endowed Professor of Leadership at Utah State University. Heather Kirkby is the Chief People Officer at Recursion Pharmaceuticals. Beatryx Washington is a Senior Vice President, General Counsel, and Corporate Secretary at O.C. Tanner. Sarah Starkey is the Chief Legal Officer, Interim Chief Human Resources Officer, and Corporate Secretary at Larry H. Miller Management Corporation. And Brit Merrill is a Labor and Employment Attorney at Holland Hart. And so, as Lindsay mentioned at the top of this, we're going to build in some time for a Q&A. So please don't hesitate to send your questions along in the chat function. To start off, Dr. Madsen, can we talk about where we are right now? I know that you've been looking at a ton of quantitative data on the impact of COVID on women in the workplace in Utah. And I know that we've sort of spoken before about the pink collar recession nationwide, but what have your findings been in Utah specifically?
That's a big question, first of all, but want to tell those that are listening in, we actually have two studies, and I'll probably integrate both in my comments today. One of them was published in December, and that was from the employer's perspective of what 100 top employers, the best places to work for employers in the state, what they have done, you know, during the pandemic, specifically in terms of flexible and family-friendly practices. And then we've been collecting a ton of data from the women's perspective, right? Women, and we collected almost 3,600 responses to a long survey, qualitative and quantitative, about their own experiences. So we've got those two perspectives, one from the employers and the numbers there, and then some from women themselves. And just so you know, we did try and get a real mix of different income levels, different sectors, and all of those things. So that data is just emerging, and we'll have our first report out on April 6th. However, I know what some of the initial data is, so that's, I think, what you're interested in. And by the way, what's fascinating is there's some different impacts, and this makes sense, right? From people, from women in different industries. And of course, in ours, the manufacturing and the data that's emerging from our research, the manufacturing, the food services, hospitality, construction, some of those really, they've had income changes. So their work hours have changed, their income have actually gone down, they've lost jobs. We had about 15% of the people that took our survey actually left the workplace. So it's about 600-700 people. And of them, the reason half of them left was that something happened to their employer. And then other numbers, 15% and so forth, they've just had to make the call to leave because of childcare, because of needs for homeschooling, so many different things. We've explored so many different things in terms of that. One thing as well, I know I could talk the whole time, but I'll just give you a few. But we measured burnout, and we haven't gotten down into, because we can do crosstabs and calculations with this and that. But what was fascinating is that there's some significant burnout. But when we've looked across income levels, industries, there's slight differences, but pretty much we're seeing burnout pretty equally, which is, I don't know what to do with that. That's not good or bad, right? It just is. The other thing we measured is hope. So we had a scale with 6 items. So I was really interested, you know, let's measure this burnout. And we had a couple scales on that. And one of them, it's a 7-point scale, and one of them was about 6.5. That's high for burnout. But hope, we're seeing in that somewhat so we somewhat agree to agree. So it matters what county you're in. There's some lower hope levels in certain counties, but we're seeing pretty even. I'm burned out, but I have some hope, right? So those are a few things. Happy to, you know, if something else comes up and those of you, you know, have questions. What we do know, and we have a lot of qualitative data where we'll get some richness of the women's experience, that we have a lot of coders going right now. But we know across the board that every person who took our survey, all those 3,600, have been impacted, and have been impacted in ways that have caused stress, have caused worry, have caused concern about money, even amongst women that are more affluent in their household money. So I think some of the experiences, we're looking at race as well. Some of those, we're definitely seeing higher levels of worry, of concern from women of color in our sample. So is that a good Good start for you, Emily.
Yeah, no, it's a depressing start,
I know.
but certainly very informative. Do you have a sense, Dr. Madsen, of how that statistic that you gave, that 15% of women leaving the workforce during COVID, compares to previous years?
No, we have not looked at previous years in the state of Utah specifically. We know national data on some of these. We can't compare even, but if we compare generally to national data, that's a little bit lower. However, the women that are really stressed the most probably didn't take time to complete our survey. I have to be honest there. We did get the data on what their companies have done. So, I'm happy to answer that. And also from the employer's perspective on what they have done. So we've got that, and there's some interesting comparisons there. And one other thing I'll mention is in our previous research, which we collected most of the data in November and December. The employers said, I'm looking at my numbers now, almost 95% of employers said that the policies that they have implemented in the practices, the flexible, all of that, they feel like about 95% of the companies said that they are seeing higher employee satisfaction from those changes. About 80% are saying that they feel that those changes, those additions, the things they do are retaining their employees. And then about 72% said that they believe that they have higher employee engagement because of those flexible and family-friendly policies.
It's nice to have a silver lining to this. And I think that's probably a good segue into your research and policy brief on the best-in-class companies in Utah and what they've implemented during the pandemic in terms of flexible policies, and then what they're planning to keep going forward. Can you speak to that a bit?
Absolutely. In terms of, let me move it over here so I can look at you. In terms of, and again, we collected this during the pandemic. We had planned to do this before the pandemic. We just hadn't gotten around to it. So we really moved it towards what are things happening during the pandemic. The number one, and this is not a surprise, but 92% of the companies said that their top, but the policy or arrangement was remote work. And almost that many, so 92 said they have switched. 91% said they think they'll keep some form of flexible and remote work going in the future. And the number two, 86% of the companies was that flexibility with the working hours. And about 80%, so not every company that said they were doing it now, about 80% said that they think they'll continue with that flexibility in the future. And then the next few are really around, the next one, 75% is around paid maternity leave, part-time roles, about 72%, paid paternity leave is about 64%. And with those things, we're seeing a trend that they're saying, yeah, we're gonna, we've maybe even had this before and we plan to keep it in the future. Paid family leave, about 60%. And then it goes down from there. What we're not seeing is much in terms of, and this is not going to surprise you, much in terms of childcare. We really struggle with that topic in the state of Utah. We really struggle. There is still, and there's some change, I think. I don't know if all of you other panelists have seen this, but there's some change, but just very slight, with the understanding that childcare is really not just a private issue. It is a public issue. And that, when you look at European countries and a lot of other places in other states, that's been known for a long time. But we don't, the United States in general doesn't recognize that as much, but in Utah, we've really been a bit behind with that. So we still see, especially legislators, push back in Utah with, why are we dealing with that? That's not an issue that we need to legislate. That's not an issue because that is a family's choice. If they choose to, I'm doing this, okay? If a woman chooses to work, that I've actually heard that language. If she chooses to work, then that's her issue. And of course, you can probably feel my blood pressure rising because it's not just a woman's issue. And for heaven's sakes, I don't know if you followed my series on Deseret News editorials with the single story. We have so many single mothers in this state. We have families that are not, but the assumption that there's a man and a woman in the home is very still strong in the state of Utah. So those are a few things. Just to tag on one more quick thing. So about, what did I say? 92% of companies said that they did, remote work, flexible location work. But in our other study, right, the new one, about 52% of the respondents said that their employer had remote work. So in that study, we really pulled in women from all different industries. So you've just got to think about the 92% versus the 52%, because there are many occupations, of course, that those essential workers and others that you just don't have that choice.
What do you think the best policies are for those types of industries to consider as they go forward and try to implement at least some flexibility? What should they be thinking about?
I did my dissertation on telework 20 years ago. So Utah's been behind a bit on that. So I've studied it back then. And each industry and job, might be different. And for 20 years, when I've consulted with companies and so forth, I've been saying the same thing. And that is, you go in and really do, and a few of you I'm looking at know HR real well, right? You go in and really look at the job description. You look at really what are the things that can be done remotely, and you don't have to be in the chair, and you analyze based on that. So there's many, many good practices. I won't take time to go through all of those, but there's best practices now but bottom line, instead of shutting a person's position down and saying, wait, you have to be 100% in the workplace, doing a really good analysis of each job and what that job might need in terms of face-to-face versus virtual. And I find myself saying face-to-face right now on Zoom. I'm like, it's good to see you face-to-face. Wait, this is not face-to-face, but.
And I think it's important to also note in terms of Utah and childcare, which is something that I've had to deal with since moving here 2.5 years ago, is the consideration that Senator Romney has just put forward in terms of looking at a childcare subsidy. And my understanding of the proposal is that he wants to send $350 a month to each family per child to cover some of those childcare costs, which certainly wouldn't entirely cover those costs, but I think might be meaningful to families in addition to some of the childcare tax credits that we've seen in the most recent legislation. But I thought that was particularly interesting coming from a legislator from Utah.
And one thing we do know, Emily, is that particularly here in the state, is that many employers don't even bring up the topic of childcare, because it's this perception, either we need to have a childcare facility or not. And then, oh, I don't even want to go there. But there's a lot of levels of conversations of where are the resources, of recommendations, of just having the research more broadly says that just when employees just have even the conversation about it and provide help and strategies, even if they're not taking all the responsibility, that helps as well.
Agreed. So at this point, I think we're going to turn to some of our individual business leaders to talk about the ways that they've implemented some of these policies in their companies. So if I can start with you, Heather, can you tell me a little bit about your role as Chief People Officer and what that's entailed as you've faced COVID issues in the workplace?
Yeah, you know, it was so fascinating, right? Because it's a moment in time where you have no playbook, right? And so I'll make my first point will be I didn't face it alone, and I realized that the minute it was happening, and it's one of the reasons I joined the company, and that was the fact that it was the whole exec team owned it, right? We were all in it together, navigating something that was unnavigable. And I think in times of crisis, which we all sort of figured out what kind of leader are we in crisis, you go back to your values, right? As a company, right? Your values have to tell you, what do you do when there's no playbook? And our first value happens to be, we care. And it was like, you know, it was like a light, a compass. It was the North Star. It was everything in the days and weeks and early months. And I think within that, there were a few things that we did that helped our people navigate it. We were incredibly transparent in how we communicated. And it happened very naturally. We very quickly were sharing daily videos from members of the exec team and beyond. I mean, and I'm talking, you know, handheld camera video, like just the most completely raw, unpolished, authentic, like communicating how we were navigating the situation, but also being vulnerable and sharing our own struggles to normalize the struggle, right? You know, and so that was sort of flexing into our care value, figuring out how to lead in crisis. I will say I personally realized pretty quickly that I had to accelerate and deepen my understanding of mental health and mental health in the context of what was going on. There's an amazing resource called the Neuro Leadership Institute, and I sort of became a student of all things neuroscience and mental health to help our people navigate it, you know. And so there was this key message of, you're not alone. This is what's happening. This is our brains on COVID. This is what it looks like against this backdrop, against a loss of certainty and connection with humans. So that's one. I think the other thing, Emily, I'd share with you is my roots are not actually in this function. My roots are as a product manager. And what product managers do as a discipline is you have empathy for your customers. And through that deep empathy, you design solutions for them. And that was another guiding star for us through all of this. It's so tempting to just fix everything as leaders, but the fix might not be a solve to the problem. And so we spent a lot of time seeking to understand how our people were struggling and what their needs were to make sure that the solutions and policies we were delivering met their needs and not just our assumptions of what they needed.
Were there certain challenges that you faced? My understanding is that there are a number of employees who are in the lab at Recursion, and certainly you can't do your lab work from your kitchen. So if you could speak a little bit to some of the challenges that you faced and how you were able to manage that operational need, that'd be great.
Yeah, so it's interesting, unlike a company where everyone can work remote, we were forced to deal with the reality of having people in the workspace very early, which at the time was a challenge. I will tell you right now, it feels like a gift that we've navigated a lot of those issues and policies related to safety in the workplace, learning about new technology that you can have, you know, I don't know, like always clean physical spaces in the workplace, right? There's new tech, there's contact tracing, and so as we look towards now bringing in the rest of our workforce back in, we've been practicing for a year what that looks like. But it was sort of treading into waters that were so completely unknown, and figuring out how can we allow people to work in the lab safely so that we continue working towards the mission. And I'll just tell you, it was really, really hard. You're essentially asking people to stay away from each other and yet work together, you know, and while they're covered in personal protective equipment. And so, I mean, I have to give so much credit to the people and our essential workers that have had to rise in the face of all this adversity and keep working. And I think about it every day. I'm having a hard time sitting in a room with a bathroom next door and the kitchen next door. And I mean, just right, there's been a lot of relative challenges, and some are bigger than others for different people through all of this.
Do you think there are certain practices that you'll keep going forward, and what do you see the future of work looking like at Recursion?
Yeah, I will tell you, let's not let this pandemic go to waste, right? I mean, what silver linings do we have to understand that the world can and should be different? And I will say personally, I've tasted it and I'm never going back. I'm never going to work in an office 5 days a week. And the research told us this for years, that women and working mothers needed flexibility. And I will tell you, I lacked the creativity to understand what that really looked like. Even for myself, I didn't even know what to ask for. And now I eat breakfast with my 2 girls 5 days a week, and I'm calm and I'm in sweatpants and I'm not in a rush. And I'm a new mother for it. And we all need to think about how we bring those insights into new ways of working so that all working moms can have those moments, and in an odd way, I'm grateful for that.
As am I. Bea, I'd like to turn to you and ask you what your experience has been in a legal role and as Senior Vice President in handling OC Tanner's pandemic response.
So a lot of my experiences kind of mirror what Heather just described. Up until the pandemic, I was pretty much in a strong legal role. I worked on transactions. I negotiated contracts with larger clients. That was my role, as well as being corporate secretary to our board. When COVID was coming, and for us, it came early because we do have offices that are global. So we were experiencing, hearing things from our team in Australia, our teams in the EU. And so it's something that we started planning for mid-February. We started having daily executive team meetings. And as Heather described, it was a team effort. It wasn't just one organization. And we met daily, and we still do, for at least an hour to discuss, what are you seeing? What are you hearing? How do we move forward? And that has been the biggest change. While we met frequently as an executive team, perhaps several times a week, that guaranteed time carve out has been instrumental in helping us with our employees. As Heather described, we also have on-site employees. We have a manufacturing division. And one of the most important things that we looked at was, is it possible for that team to be on-site and be safe? So all of our strategy around, what's the equipment that they'll need. We were early in getting masks delivered in, as well as other equipment. Machines, they're big, very, very heavy machines. So we had to figure out how we space things out. And for anyone that's ever visited OC Tanner, our manufacturing is occurring right in the middle of our offices. We are an integrated office space. So all of our employees are seeing each other. So some decisions had to be made with, what are we moving? What do the cells look like? How do we keep that space? So we had frontline workers, and for our clients, they have a number of frontline workers. So we were giving a lot of consideration to not only are we staying open for manufacturing for the safety of and making sure that our employees are safe, but how can we assist our clients with that? So pretty early on, we also started sharing best practices among our clients. So some of them are in healthcare, others in manufacturing, who could share best practices as things were moving. We were able to successfully stay open and keep everyone safe. We have not had an on-site transmission. It's been a wonderful thing, considering that we're now a year into this. And some of the things that we were able to implement pretty early were temperature checks, site checks, one entrance in, one entrance out. And I think those are the things that we were able to do early on. With regard to our office staff, we were able to move people to work from home pretty quickly. Again, we kind of had a head start in thinking through what that would look like, not having people come in. We were able to order computer equipment and some other things that people would need pretty early on. And, you know, as Heather mentioned, we figured out people can do a lot of their job responsibilities from home. And we're still talking through what that looks like on the other side of the pandemic, but there will be some flexibility in there for our employees because we've learned that we can be flexible.
Can you share some of the thoughts that you've had and that your team has had in terms of what to implement going forward?
So the big thing is we are a culture company. We help other companies with their employee culture, and we believe in walking what we're talking. And so there's a lot of that happens in a collaborative environment. So a lot of our focus has been how do we get people rallied together, but when we can't be physically together, but you know, what will we maintain going forward? We do think that there needs to be some space for people to come into the office at times and work together and meet clients. We have a beautiful facility. We have lean manufacturing and all these other things that help our clients understand why our culture is so phenomenal. And so there are aspects of that we'd love to maintain. We don't think that will be a 5-day-a-week in the office proposition moving forward. We're still nailing it down, but there are a lot of things that Dr. Madsen mentioned are things that we consider. You know, we didn't have some major exodus from the workforce for many of the women in our office. And we do think about that when we talk about flexibility and what that has looked like. We see children in the background on our calls, and you know, at this point, we know their names. We say hello to them, and we recognize that their parent is able to continue doing work and being effective in that environment. So we recognize that we can move forward that way. Did we lose Emily?
It does look like she's frozen.
Yeah. So because she can't ask questions, one of the things I do want to touch on that we have implemented that has been really important to a lot of our employees. We had an on-site healthcare clinic that we opened in August 2019. And one of the things that we did moving into the pandemic was increase the availability of mental health resources. And that looks different across the board. So it could be talking with a counselor, but it could also be, I'm not necessarily sure what to do about this health issue with my child, that now I can't take them to a traditional medical facility. I don't know if you all remember that period of time where, you know, you're told, don't come, you know, to the doctor for routine things. But we had this amazing facility that was designed specifically for our employees and their families that people could get into. So those were some of the transitions that we made, but we also have an employee resource and we have employees who specifically are focused on activities for our employees. So we had an on-site healthcare facility that then made the transition to having online bar classes and exercise classes, which some of our teams do as a group. Our team in Australia takes yoga together with a lot of frequency. So some of those activities became more meaningful to our employees during COVID, but the mental health resources and increasing those opportunities for our employees was at the forefront. And one of the things that's a little bit different from at OC Tanner than some other companies perhaps is that our employee assistance program is available to all of an employee's family. So your in-laws could avail themselves of some time and attention, your children, your spouse. So there are some things that we've been able to offer and increase the visibility of. We always had them that allowed our employees to know that we were there for their whole being, not just their work life.
That's pretty wonderful. I have to admit I lost some internet in the middle there, but I did get back for the yoga in Australia piece, which sounds really wonderful. If we could move on to Sarah. Sarah, I'd love to hear about the intersection of your roles. It sounds like you have a human resources role in addition to your chief legal officer role. Can you speak to how you were able to deal with these types of issues during the pandemic?
Sure. Fun fact before I get started on that. So I was promoted to the chief legal officer at the beginning of 2020, and the gentleman who preceded me fully retired on March 1st, along with our chief human resources officer leaving. So I really began both of those roles on March 1st, and I actually was on vacation, came back on March 9th. And then, as I call it, the first Wednesday of Rona, which was the day that Rudy Gobert tested positive. And my partner is actually the Senior Vice President of Security for the Utah Jazz. So he was in Oklahoma City as this all started, right? So that was kind of my first week in my two new roles. So it was definitely a trial by fire kind of year. And we have a portfolio of companies that we manage from my seat. We have an automotive portfolio group, which has 65 dealerships in 7 Western states. We have a finance company, which is located in Sandy, Utah. We have, or had, the Utah Jazz and the Arena Vivint Smart Home Arena. And then we also have the Bees and the movie theaters. So we have this diversified group of employees, and we had about 11,000 employees. We've since added a healthcare company, but that was in December. So at the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic, we had about 11,000 employees spread across 7 states. So we also, as an executive team, began meeting every morning for at least an hour, sometimes 2 hours, to really go round the horn and talk about what was happening. From a legal perspective, one of my primary functions at that point was tracking state and local shutdowns. So we have in our automotive dealerships an essential frontline workforce, right? People need to continue to be able to be mobile, particularly those individuals who are in healthcare functions, and cars break down and cars crash, and people think, oh, you don't need a car dealership to be open. How is that essential? People actually do need to go and get cars very regularly, right? They either stop working, or you need a new one, or they crash, however that might work. And then also the service departments are very essential to keep everybody moving, keep America moving. So as things were shutting down, we would have to look at what the new rules were and how we fit into that. So that was a primary function of mine, which interplayed with who could come to work on any given morning in any given state. So our primary focus was, of course, our employee safety. Who could work, and if we were having an operation where we were still open, how could we ensure that they were working safely? And our businesses that were continuing to be operational as essential were also consumer facing. So we're actually dealing with the public. So there's this kind of additional factor of making sure that people are safe. And then we've got layered on some businesses that were fully shut down. And then how do we best support those employees who are now shifted to a work from home environment, but with little to no work to be had? And then we had businesses like our finance company where we were able to actually shift, interestingly, to a full work from home environment very quickly. Interestingly enough, the week before the first Wednesday of Rona, we went through a test of a work from home to see how we could do it. We were testing our technology at our finance company. So they had just gone through this exercise, and everyone had been told to bring their computers home. So it just so happened that it actually coincided very well to go work from home. So employee safety was paramount. What we could have open and be following all of the state and local rules. And then, of course, consumer safety, right? So all of those factors were at play. And we, very similar to OC Tanner, we moved quickly on masks. Our owner, Gail Miller, is also the chairwoman of the board for Intermountain Healthcare. So we were very cognizant of the fact that masks were in short supply, and we didn't want to go out and utilize our resources or connections to gobble up what needed to be in the healthcare industry. So we actually had masks produced made of vinyl boat cover material. We went to a local boat company and had them made. And now if you look at them, first of all, they were wildly expensive. And they are so, if you were to wear one right now, you would be like, oh, I can't breathe. They're thick, they're heavy, but they were there and we had them almost, within the first week, and we were able to deploy them to the dealerships and really keep our contraction rates very low. And then hand sanitizer, right? So we leveraged vendors that we use for cleaning the dealerships as it relates to oil recycling. And we were able to leverage that relationship to get them and pivot to cleaning facilities to keep them clean. Then we looked at our workforce who could work from home, right? So the office that I'm in, from a management company perspective, could really pivot and work from home. And we really had to communicate to employees, it was paramount, that we could get them what they needed. People were so nervous that they just wanted to keep their head down. And we would say, what do you need? Do you have a computer that works? Do you have a chair? Do you have a mouse? And everyone just kind of said yes. So we had to have managers reach out individually and really ask the questions. As an example, I found out that one of my direct reports had been sitting on a folding chair for a couple of weeks, notwithstanding me having offered, go to the office, grab your chair, like let's do this. But everyone kind of wanted to put their head down. And when you talk about burnout, Dr. Madsen, a couple of weeks ago, we were on an all staff call, and the message that I wanted to make sure was heard was that we do encourage, we want people to be working hard and being productive, but it is okay. You don't have to work 15, 16 hours a day. It is okay to, take a breath and kind of go back to regular working hours. At the beginning, we were all working 20-hour days, 7 days a week. I used to make a joke that it was like the 30th, 50th, 70th Wednesday of the Rona, because there were no weekends, there were no holidays, there were no nights. There was just work to keep people safe and working where we could and employed where we could. Those were the important factors, and sleep was not one of them. So those were some of the things. Another thing that we did, which we don't have an on-site healthcare facility like OC Tanner. That sounds amazing though. One thing that we did to try and help support our employees is we really focused on virtual healthcare visits. Our director of benefits is amazing. Her name's Brianne, and she was just constantly thinking about ways that we could pivot our healthcare in a way that would be beneficial for our employees. So we really started messaging and focusing on virtual visits, and then we dropped the copays so that families felt more inclined to utilize that service, because one, there was no barrier on payment, so they would be more apt to explore kind of if it was a little bit more challenging to do it the first time. And we've actually seen a big shift of using virtual visits now that we're kind of coming out of COVID, because people have gotten used to it, and we've maintained this no copay so that we can continue to steer employees that way. We also expanded our leave. Before the federal government came in and told us we had to, right? There were obviously a lot of policies that we implemented once the government came in and it gave some structure around it. But prior to that, we wanted to make sure that even our essential frontline workforce felt safe. And if we had employees who didn't have childcare, or they had an underlying condition, if they came and talked to their HR provider or people and culture provider or manager and expressed that, we were being very accommodating to ensure that people weren't being quote unquote forced to work if they didn't feel safe or they couldn't because of childcare needs.
Do you think,
go ahead.
Do you think a lot of these policies are policies that you'll continue going forward? Do you have a sense yet of what you'd like to implement in the future?
Yes. So some of the leave policies that we implemented that are very COVID specific in our workforces that were frontline workers, probably not, because we were being so flexible, right? It was a come to us and if you need. However, we have implemented, not necessarily pandemic related prior to, we do have parental leave and we have adoption leave and we have family leave and PTO and vacation and sick time. So we've got a lot of those policies already. We just expanded them and made them much more flexible during COVID. Some of the things that I think we will keep will be for office kind of people who aren't in the front line working. The flexible work from home, I believe, will stay. And it's really a department by department type of procedure where the departments are coordinating in and amongst themselves to ensure that all the work is being accomplished productively. We have found through analytics a couple of departments that work better together and they actually are more productive, that are more consumer facing in the office. So we're kind of working with that a little bit. We've also implemented a flexible holiday policy, which really interrelate a little bit more with what we saw over the summer and diversity, inclusion, and belonging, and social justice issues, and recognizing that not everyone is probably inclined to place the same value on every holiday that we've considered to be office closure holidays. So we've expanded holidays so that people can celebrate whatever is important to them and their family. So that's one that will remain in place as well. And I think it will probably keep virtual visits the same and really keep an eye on what we can do to expand benefits to be more useful for our employees as well.
Thank you. Brit, it would be wonderful to hear. I know we have a few clients who are on the line and discussing some of the issues that their businesses have faced and some of the policies they're thinking about implementing. Can you speak to some of the issues that clients have come to you with as they look towards the future for workplace policies?
Yeah, so in the beginning, right, when coronavirus first hit, we were working with clients to implement work from home policies, right? If they didn't have them in place, what do you need? And when we were working around the clock to kind of get those set for people. Then we were working on like, how do you comply with Families First Coronavirus Relief Act, the CARES Act, right? Really working on that. And then our work sort of shifted to looking at the CDC guidelines, the EEOC guidelines. How do we implement workplace safety issues in the workplace? How do we, companies would call up, should we do temperature checks? How do we do them? How do we store this data, right? So this has sort of been the evolution through coronavirus. And lately what we're seeing is our companies looking at towards the future, right? They're revisiting their holiday policies, right? And a lot of companies like Larry H. Miller are shifting to like this floating holiday, right? So instead of having President's Day and the 24th of July here in Utah as holidays, we're going to shift those to floating holidays, and employees can use those on those holidays, but they can also choose to use them throughout the year whenever they want to a holiday that's important to them. We're seeing companies, look at their PTO policies. A few years back, unlimited PTO policies were sort of the thing. Then we recognized that actually employees tend to take less leave when they have unlimited PTO versus when they feel like they've earned it and it's sort of in their bank. But we are actually seeing kind of a shift back towards that, interestingly. So, and I will just say, legally, remember that the only types of leave that employers are legally required to offer are like jury duty leave, voting leave, like all of these other things are just optional. They're not required. They keep paid holidays, vacation leave, paid sick time, like those are not required in Utah, right? And yet employers offer these. They offer bereavement leave and unpaid personal leave. And so I think it's really interesting to see the coronavirus has sort of given us a reason to look at those and say what's working, what's not working, and what should we offer for the future.
Do you have advice for companies as they try to modernize some of their policies?
Yeah, I think smart companies will take a really hard look at what policies are working for them and sort of be brave about saying, okay, like this is what we're going to do moving forward, right? You can always change your policies in the future. So we see a lot of companies like Heather Kirkby at Recursion, like doing employee surveys, right? Asking your employees actually, what do you want? What do you need? What's going to work for you? And every workplace is different. Every industry is different. Even within your workplace, right? You have employees who fill different functions. These are not one size fits all, but I think at this point, it's just a really great time of the silver lining, sort of say, okay, what should we do moving forward and take those steps into the future.
Sarah, did you have a point about modernizing?
I love this new raising hand feature, yes. I wanted to note that the unlimited PTO that Brit just mentioned, I think one of the new creative ways that companies are addressing that is actually maintaining the unlimited PTO and then requiring a certain amount of PTO be taken. And I think particularly for working parents, that's helpful, because I do find that now that we're all working from home, or I'm obviously in the office right now, but more working from home and helping with the children, you do the schoolwork and all of that kind of thing. You almost feel like you really can't take a vacation now. And if you have unlimited, are you taking it? Is it, I think of it as work-life integration, right? I'm always kind of working, I'm always kind of living, but being required, now we don't have this policy, by the way, but being required to take a week off would encourage people. So you get the benefit of the PTO, kind of that morale lift of unlimited PTO, but then you also ensure that you don't have burnout by forcing a week or two, or, you know, whatever the company would like. And then I also wanted to highlight another thing that we did. We're obviously a family-owned business. We are owned by the Miller family, and voting is very important to the family. And we implemented early in the summer, prior to primaries, paid voting time for all of our employees, all of our full-time employees, so that anyone could take time off and didn't feel the pressure of needing to. Particularly, in one of the pieces of the conversation was people who are already dealing with childcare issues, or even in a non-pandemic environment, childcare issues, where you may need to either take your child at 6 a.m. to get in line to vote. Obviously in Utah, we have vote by mail, but we operate in many different states. So to really alleviate some of the difficulties with voting, particularly for working parents who are dealing with school drop off and pick up and daycare and all those things, and then also trying to make it to the polls. So we did implement a paid voting time, paid time off as well.
Thank you. Heather, I have a question for you in your role as Chief People Officer, which I'd love to know more about exactly what that entails. But my understanding is that there has been a shift to diversity, and needs to be a shift to diversity as a strategic business priority. Can you speak as to what tools you've used to help further that shift? Oh, but you're muted.
Yeah, I'm on mute. I could speak for hours and days, but I'll say something in a few minutes. I'll start with this. It has to be a business priority, and you have to start early. One of the reasons I joined the company was because they had a diverse executive team, and Chris, the CEO founder, cared so deeply about it. From the very origins. You know, we're incredibly proud. We're north of 200 people now. We're 40% women at all levels, including the executive team. And I will tell you personally, to be the member of an executive team that's 40% women is night and day from having one other woman on the team, or whatever it is, right? You have to commit. You have to treat it like a business priority. You have to have key success metrics. You have to hold people accountable for it. And it has to be part of the culture. And diversity is nothing without equity and inclusion. And so you have to think about them holistically. And maybe one specific point I'll make, we know it exists, but unconscious bias and systemic racism, they are truths, and they will forever be in our face, wind in our face as we try to make progress. So every people decision is inherently biased. You need to design systems top to bottom, start to finish, that block bias every time a person decision is being made. Hiring, promoting, compensation, rewarding, performance management, every single one of them, right? So how do you design your systems to get the outcomes that you want? And right, the end game is our missions, right? The end game is, it's unequivocal that heterogeneous teams outperform homogeneous. And at Recursion, we also say, look, we believe it's the right thing to do. There's a moral case for this, you know, like what legacy do you want to leave in the world? So that's my short answer. I could talk forever. I have deep passion for this.
And certainly the topic for another webinar.
So much work to be done.
Yeah, agreed. So taking this from a more long-term perspective and looking at more of a short-term perspective, my next question is for Brit. This is very much top of mind as I'm going straight from this webinar to go get my vaccine today. So businesses are facing the challenge of, you're bringing people back into the office. Are employers required can employers require vaccinations? And can you talk about some of the nuances of what businesses are looking at now?
Yeah, that's a great question. And we are getting this sort of the hot button issue right now, right, as vaccines are more widely available. In general, yes, you can likely require it, but the smart answer is that you should probably not require it and instead incentivize it in certain ways. And even within incentivizing, there's some nuances there. You can't provide, according to the EEOC, like your incentives can't be too great, or they see it as being more of a requirement, or it's no longer voluntary. So what we are seeing employers do are offers things like, 2 hours of PTO to go and get your vaccine. If you're not feeling well after you get your vaccine, maybe you get 1 day of paid sick leave to stay home and kind of recover from that. And so there's actually a really great article that I will direct people to on Holland Hart's website. If you Google, Holland Hart COVID vaccine mandate or something, we sort of analyze this whole thing. What's allowed, what's not, what are the risks, and kind of pros and cons that employers should consider as they implement these policies and decide how they're going to handle the vaccine in the workplace.
Emily, there's one thing, I see our time is going away, but there's just a couple of key points that I want to make from the research. And one is, there's been a couple of really significant large studies nationally this past year or two that say that you can have all these policies in place and it may not do anything for your company. I mean, just checking the list off to have this and that, like my big list, it can help a little bit, but generally speaking, the research says if you don't couple the policies you're doing with the cultural change, and Heather's talked about this and many have, that deep work. I had unconscious bias too. I have been working on that for 10 years and actually how to teach it and so forth. So, but a lot of unconscious bias training has been shown not to work. It has to be done well, rigorously, deep. And I can't imagine people getting into deep work without having some of that training. If you understand how your brain works in different ways and how it's all over the place, and you don't do it in shaming and blaming ways either, because we all have it, but going into that deep work and just checking off the list. In some of my books, I have models of this, but just checking it off the list, that does a slight bit. But unless it's taken seriously, it's not going to work. So I just wanted to make sure that was really clear, that if you do all these policies, let's give you ideas, and those are important. But if you're not walking the walk, if you're not talking, the whole thing, walking the talk, or whatever the metaphor is, then it's not going to connect. So I wanted to say that if it's not coupled with DEI and belonging, and they all mean different things, right? And it's not connected with the business case. Heather, you were just using all of the language that I used to, then it's not going to connect. The exciting thing is this, that more companies, more leaders, more white men, I have to say, in the state, there's still plenty that don't get it, but there's more stepping forward, even in the last couple of years, saying, you know what? I want to do better. I want to get this. Let's help. Let's do what we need to do. There's still an awful lot of work. I do reports that say how bad we are on women's equality and equity, but there's some real shifting. And I think I have to say the dynamics of the last 2 years or 3 years, starting with Me Too, even just the election of Trump really brought women's voices up. Whether you supported him or not, the pandemic, the race riots this summer, everything has led to a place where I don't think you can do good business anymore moving forward unless you do what we're talking about.
Very much agreed. For one last thought, B, I'd like to ask you what you think employees at OC Tanner might be able to do in order to further some of the goals that we've spoken about on this call.
So I think one of the things that we implemented during COVID that I think will be maintained is the amount of transparency and communication that we have. We took it to a whole nother level. So for example, when we started having these daily executive team meetings, we also started a daily email communication. So we were telling people everything that was going on. And depending on who the communication came from, you could get something very personal. So it could be, I'm sluggish today too, or, some days it's just kind of hard to get into the groove. And it's sharing those experiences across the board and just reminding people of the resources that we had internally. We have had a number of town hall meetings, and it's something that we've always done with regularity, but we've amped it up. So as an executive team, we're going into team meetings and saying, what are your questions? What are you concerned about? And some of them people are able to ask questions anonymously, and others people have felt extremely comfortable in just asking the question. One of the things that we did around diversity, equity, and inclusion is we had probably, so the riots here occurred over a weekend, and by that Wednesday, we had a town hall meeting where a number of employees of color were sharing their experiences, and it was eye-opening for me as a person of color to understand that most people didn't necessarily equate what they were seeing or what they were hearing about with something that I could experience. And so it really allowed us to have a shift in conversation and allow people to truly see people as the people that they are. A quarter of our workforce is foreign born. We have a number of immigrants who work for us, and that's something that we appreciate, and we appreciate the diversity of that. But I think it also took it to another level where people really appreciated someone's experiences being something other than what they see day to day. And we've continued some of those conversations and suggested resources for people to explore, on their own. So to Dr. Madsen's point, not shaming anyone, but saying, these are great books to read, or these are, great things to seek out if you're interested in exploring this on a personal level. We also have, through our institute, we have implemented a lot of research for our clients in what a diverse workforce looks like and the productivity of it, and it being part of the culture. So those are some of the things that I don't see us moving away from. They're just continuing to grow. In fact, we've created a new channel for communicating with our employees. Instead of the daily email, we'll have a website where it'll be a little bit more interactive, and some vlogging and blogging will be included in it. So for me, a traditional lawyer, that's going to be a new task that I'll have to learn. But I'm really excited for some of the things that we have learned during what are unprecedented times. But there are definitely some golden things that have come out of this time period that I think make us a better company, a better workforce, and a more inclusive one.
Agreed. I see that we are a couple minutes over. I do want to address the one question that we did receive about whether there's a concern that with more flexible working, parents will end up being full-time parents and workers. And I personally have a friend who's on this call right now who I know works until midnight or 1 a.m. Every single day so that she can balance her childcare responsibilities as well as her full-time job. And so I don't know if any of you have any insights on how we avoid overwhelming people and working parents in particular, but if so, I'd love to hear.
I put a little note in the chat that, this is doing more training with managers on how to really discuss these issues and needs and not have such a box. Like looking at when you can work or whatever, but even from 20 years ago when I was doing my dissertation, teleworking from home still included with certain age children, making sure there's childcare as well. And it could be childcare in the home. But, you can't, unlike the first, 4 months, how long did it go when there was no childcare? You all are younger than me. So That often is not the ideal situation, right? But even just being in the home and not having that travel time and being able to eat breakfast with your kids, but then, you know, especially if you have young children, working out who's going to, you know, so you can be fully present at least during certain times is going to be important. But that's an individual conversation. And if we try to do too many policies that are really strict, it doesn't, we need those. Heather may push back on this. We need some of those, but the teaching the supervisors, managers, and leaders how to have those conversations, what to ask for, what flexibility they have to make sure that all women perform and feel good about their contributions at home and at the job, right? That's the place that we want all of our employees to be, so they're retained, so they can get promoted, so they can become leaders, you know, in the future.
And I think that this goes to the heart of one of the issues that we're seeing with the pink recession, as it's being called, is that in the early stages of the pandemic, and quite frankly, even now with some school districts not being open, if you have let's say a 9-year-old that's a little too old to go to daycare, but is doing school from home, and you're the working parent who's working and trying to assist with that child, or during the very early stages where there was no daycare available to you, that is where it seems to have fallen on the shoulders of the mothers to carry both of those things simultaneously. And quite frankly, I think, in my opinion, what companies were doing to support at that point was allow for the flexibility to do, unfortunately, all of it. And what we're trying to do now is get back to an environment where now we do continue to have flexibility, but hopefully those working parents, and in this particular case, mothers, because it did fall a lot on the mothers, generally speaking, mostly on mothers, to help with that. Where there's continued ability to work from home, where you're having breakfast, you're not racing, and maybe you're there for the 3 o'clock snack time when they come home, but then you have childcare support. So we continue with that flexibility, but hopefully it's not going to continue to be that 20-hour-a-day job that we had from what I would say March until July-ish. And for some people continuing on, depending on the school and daycare situation in their neighborhoods. So I think that that's kind of the core of this issue, is how do we maintain flexible working environments, but hopefully the working parents have the support they need so that they're not actually trying to run them in tandem or in parallel.
I could certainly talk to this incredible panel all day. I feel very fortunate to have had the wisdom from all of you and to learn about all of your companies and Dr. Madsen, all of your research. I'd like to thank Utah Business and Holland Hart, Charles Cobbins, and Debbie Campbell. I'd also like to thank Ashley Peck and Adrienne Bell for their support as we put this webinar together. Lots more to talk about, but thank you all for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you everybody for being here, and thank you Emily and Holland Hart for hosting this wonderful webinar for us in our webinar series. Just so all of our participants know, this video will be available on our website, utahbusiness.com, for you to share with all of your friends. There were some great points that everybody made today, so please be sure to stop by. It should be up online by this afternoon. So if you have any other questions, or if you asked a question and we didn't have time for it today, shoot us a message at Utah Business and we will put you in touch with the panel that spoke today. So thank you all for coming and taking time out of your days. Have a great rest of your afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.